As you can see in my very, very short CV here, indeed, it's mostly practical path, right? So I graduated in Kyrgyz National University International Relations with a major in international relations. And my career started with the enterprise development project. So initially, like in 2002, when I graduated from the university, I wanted to work on something big on international level. And that was my northern star, along the whole career. But along the way, I start adding some other purposes, not just, oh, I want to work on international level. That was just the level of engagement, but the purpose was evolving along the way. And the first two, the USAID Enterprise Development Project and TFI International, that's our like purely business areas. TFI International, that was a construction company, and we built probably like 60% of the Manas Air Base, US Gansi Air Base in Kyrgyzstan, in Manas Airport. But in 2009, I decided that I want to do something bigger than just making money, just doing business. And that's when I joined Eurasia Foundation. And then there was a call for executive director of the Open Society Foundation in Kyrgyzstan. It's known as Soros Foundation. And I believe that Soros Foundation, Eurasia Foundation and Soros Foundation, and then Harvard, these three elements that shaped my vision of what I want to dedicate my life to in the next, like whatever time I have on this planet. My fundamental goal was, I let me say this way, because it would be interesting, I believe, for the audience to understand what was the driver of my switch from civil society development into innovation and entrepreneurship. Over 15 years at least, my fundamental goal was to advance and support civil society development, open society in Kyrgyzstan and across Central Asia. But then I realized that probably we have to find another leverage, to advance those values and focus not just on civil society, that quite often is very politicized, quite often has a tremendous pressure from the governments. But I discovered that there is actually another power that might be transformative, but not yet transformative for the society. That's entrepreneurs, and that is why I start studying, the role of entrepreneurship. And I cultivated some ideas that I applied in my research. And when I came to MIT Legatum Center, I actually proposed them an idea. I said, like, listen, the Legatum Center is working heavily in Africa. I mean, like 90% of the off-campus programs that the Legatum Center was implementing were focusing on Africa. Fair enough, there is a huge need, but at the same time, I came with an idea that there is another untapped region, which is called Central Asia, or you can expand it to like Central Asia and Caucasus. And I started advancing this idea, and it was supported by the High Technology Park, who invested in me in the center to conduct a research. I think that Galim and Eric mentioned already, and we'll get to this soon. So the overall idea was to research and understand what the Central Asia looks like in the context of innovation and entrepreneurship. Nowadays, we witness, tremendous growth, economic growth, all over the world. And if you can see my screen, you could notice that like all those countries that are listed here that have at least 6% growth, annual growth, are the countries in what we call like emerging markets, developing markets, global south. We like, we don't use these definitions. We call them growth markets because growth is happening there. The only European country that we can see here is Ireland, right? And Ireland shows like 9.1% growth. But again, and we can see that some countries like Kyrgyzstan is like 8% growth, right? Uzbekistan 6.8% growth, and the Tajikistan is also, it's here, yes. Tajikistan 7.5% growth, and that's great. That's tremendous, especially comparing with the Western Hemisphere, where the projection is like from 2 to 2.4% GDP growth rate, right? Sounds cool, but there is a fundamental problem in this, that growth doesn't mean prosperity. That growth might be on its own. And here, even on this chart, we can see that Sudan, for example, showed like 24.3% growth. I mean, like, wow. But it's mostly driven by the oil export, right? So it's actually still the same colonial paradigm of development of this growth when the oil is extracted and exported, right? And here as well, like on the fourth place, we can see Ireland, 9.1%, and Ireland's growth has been largely driven by the pharmaceutical products with a high level of value added. So even on this chart, we can see that growth might be different, right? Especially when there are weak institutions. There is a big question if this growth and the wealth that this growth generate actually diffused among the general population. Does it actually generate some internal capacity of the country? What we call is, in my recent paper that I'm working on now, I introducing these two concepts. One is transactional activity and productive capacity. Transactional activity is what I would call the situation in South Sudan or in Nigeria. When a country demonstrates some growth, right? They extract some revenue, some minerals, oil, you name it. They sell it. Yes, the growth happens. The GDP raise, great. That may be even referred to Kyrgyzstan, for example, my country, that where the growth is mostly driven by investments in residential construction service, in residential construction, and in the trade. When people buy, like some products from China, from Europe, and then export it to Russia. That I would call transactional activity because yes, the growth happens, the money flow in and flow out. But does this growth actually contributes into productive capacity? And by productive capacity, we can refer here to Ireland. Their capacity to actually build this, to actually create new products, reinvest in R&D, and so on. And this is what we call innovation-driven entrepreneurship. So here, discussing and researching the drivers of growth, we understand that growth might be different. Growth might be harmful. Growth might be unequal. Growth might be whatever, like whatever, but not contributing to prosperity. So this is what we actually trying to challenge in our work as MIT Kuo Sharper Center for Prosperity and Entrepreneurship. We believe that it is time to rethink the paradigm of development. And this is where we make a bet, let's say, on innovation and entrepreneurship, on innovative entrepreneurs who create something new. And we believe that it is possible. The old narratives tell us that, oh, the deep tech, that innovation, R&D, only possible, like in well-established economies, in the US and in Europe, you name it. But this is not true. We see a number of companies, we have a strong evidence that says that no, actually, deep tech happens in what we call growth markets. The question is like, it's not enough. We have to enhance it. And here is where we get to the next point. How can we create ecosystem and preconditions for those innovations to thrive? And why to innovate? This is probably my last concept piece that I will refer to because I don't want to be too boring for you. But like, why innovative entrepreneurship? And here again, like, I'm happy that we have here all the academists and researchers, so we can speak academic language. And I refer to the work of Joseph Schumpeter, who created this concept of Schumpeterian entrepreneurship and brought this definition of creative destruction, which is a process where new innovation replace outdated industries, products, and technologies. Yes, in the context of individual enterprise, that's harmful. Not harmful, it's painful. When your competitors take over your business because they are more innovative, they bring something new, new technologies, and so on. But in general, for civilization, for the markets, that's a good thing. The creative destruction is a process where innovators, innovative entrepreneurs, they are constantly redesign, reshape the market, technologies, and they create constantly something new. And yes, as a result, the outdated technologies, they fall out, they die. But that's the price that you pay for the real growth. That's the price that you pay for the real innovation that happens. And this is my research that I published last year, in January last year. That's an ecosystem for innovation-driven entrepreneurship. It is a comparative analysis of Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan. I didn't include, unfortunately, Tajikistan and Turkmenistan, mostly because of the data scarcity in those countries. And so I had to limit it to these three countries. And you can find it on our website. So I will not go too deep into the research because, like, that's where you can study MIT Innovation Ecosystem model. I explain in my paper what's it all about, and how you analyze it. And then the framework to analyze innovation ecosystem. And here, this is what you can find in my research, the comparative analysis on different data and so on. I believe that the fundamental gap that we have in Central Asia is to unlock this internal capacity for innovation. And what I mean, we have researchers, we have scientists who work on in different domains. The problem is that, and I believe that's a legacy of the Soviet system that was very centralized, especially in terms of the science. It was very centralized and very closed, that we never built a proper connection between science and entrepreneurship, right? I wrote another op-ed like a few months ago that where I try to address exactly this point, and let me explain what the point is. Like the inflection point in technological race between the US and the Soviet Union happened in 1971, when the Soviet Union and the United States were more or less equal rivals, in developing computers, in developing all those technologies. But in 1971, when the United States, by the demand of the market, start focusing mostly on microchips that would allow them to build individual laptops, the Soviet Union decided, it was, since it was centralized, they were like, there is no need for microchips because, there is no need for the individual laptops and so on. They didn't see this. They decided to focus on bigger, more fundamental technology. And that was the bifurcation point, in technology, when the US followed the market and they ended up, investing and developing mostly, in microchips and so on, and ended up with laptops and so on, while the Soviet Union took a different path. And eventually this different path was a dead end, you know. And that's just an example of two different approaches with a market-driven and centralized approach. And that is why I always stand for market-driven. That probably might be less efficient, in a short term, but more uh, livable in the long term. So this is the legacy that we still have in Central Asia, that the science is separated from the market. So the biggest then question is how we can transform the science, how we can connect the science, this R&D, enhance it and connect it to the market, to entrepreneurs. How we connect those two kinds of minds. And in my research, you will find one of the most disturbing data that is about the R&D expenditures. The average R&D expenditure in Central Asia is 0.14% of GDP. Just for comparison, like Israel has 6% GDP. South Korea has 4.5% GDP. Don't quote me because I might be wrong in details, that my like 2 years old data. But my point is that we are heavily underfunding our R&D capacity. We do not invest properly. And it's not just increasing R&D, it's about finding the proper way how to invest in R&D, to find the proper domains to invest. Where is the comparative advantage of our markets where we can allocate our very limited resources, for R&D? This is what my research is about. It doesn't give you, the blueprint. It highlights the problem, but understanding the problem is already half way to the solution of the problem. This is what I believe. I believe that one of the fundamental mind shifts that we have to make in Central Asia, especially when we speak about uh, innovative entrepreneurship, that in Central Asia mostly perceived as startups, and I don't agree that. And this is what we discussed with Ilyas in our last podcast, right? I believe we have to expand the idea of innovations, not to limit it to startups. And what I believe we have to advance the idea that innovative entrepreneurship should be driven by a problem they're focusing on, that they want to solve. And the problem is local one, you know, In Central Asia, we have a bunch of problems in energy sector, in water management, in agriculture and climate adaptation, and so on. And these are the challenges that are not unique for Central Asia. They are universal globally, right? But I see quite often startups that are like focusing on something, like some
Mm.
ideas that are scalable, sexy, like, oh, we have AI, let's apply AI here and there, like, yes, but why? What is the purpose of that? Just to make money? So we have to build this mind shift, like, and that is why like we have to build more conversations like this because this is how we change the narratives about who we are, what we are capable of, and what we have to do. That's my point.